Today we have three speakers, and I have Lanny Sinajini from University of Montana, who's right here. Ronalda Sosi from University of Montana, right here, and Crystal Tully Cordova from University of Utah, and then finally Lanny Sinajini from University of New Mexico. And I'll also let them properly introduce themselves more in detail. And so today our session is related to a specific example with the Navajo Nation on how these particular researchers have been involved with the tribe and working with the community, as well as considering traditional knowledge and the research that they do. So the prior years, we've had sessions on traditional knowledge on climate adaptation, and we had a variety of examples from various tribes. And this year, we decided to do something more specific. And so thank you for being here in this session. So the three presenters, actually two of the presenters, contributed to the special issue that I'm going to pass around. It's an issue that I edited and I brought together the authors, and it's called Emerging Voices of Tribal Perspectives in Water Resources. This is available freely online, and so you can download the papers. So one of my, and then also we have two of the Native Waters on Arid Lands team members, actually two projects, but probably 5 or 6 INAWAL co-authors in this special issue as well. And one of them is Helen Fillmore. She's like on the ball. She printed her paper and an abstract and put it out for everybody. So this is one of the papers in this book. So we'll pass that around and encourage you to look at it if you want to see more in detail the work of these three researchers, as well as the INAWAL project team members. So we also have a survey that we'll be administering at the end, just to see how well we did, and we always consider the feedback we get every year to improve for next year's conference. So thank you for being here, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to the first speaker, Lanny Sinajini. Thank you.
Hello. Yats a she Lanny Sinajini and she Filipino Nishla Tachini Bashashin Filipino Dashachain Senachini Dashinala. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lanny Sinajini. I am an assistant professor at the University of New Mexico in the Department of Community and Regional Planning. But I want to thank you all for being here today and coming here to watch our presentations and to learn more about the research we've been doing on the Navajo Nation. And today I will be presenting some of the research I've been doing and my approaches to that research in the Chusca Mountains, which are on the Navajo Nation. So here's a quick outline of my presentation. First I'll go over introduction, then I'll talk a little bit about the intersections of traditional knowledge and science, then go more over into like what my research topics are about, mountain hydrology, snowpack, stream flow, and then a bit of discussion at the end. So before I begin, I just wanted to give a little more context about me and where this research is coming from personally. If some of you or some of the Navajos in the audience may have gathered, I am both Navajo and Filipino. My mom, my maternal grandparents, they immigrated from the Philippines to Hawaii during the First World War, and that's where they raised my mom and her siblings. And eventually, my mom came from Hawaii to New Mexico, where she met my father, and they got married and decided to raise me and my brother and sister in my dad's home community of Nak'nalji, or Torreon. So this photo here on the top right here shows a photo of my sister and I with my auntie, who still lives on the Big Island of Hawaii. And then this bottom right here photo shows a picture of me, my sister, and some of our cousins and nieces, and our niece at my grandmother's house in Torreon, and it's about maybe 100 yards from where I grew up. And so I was very, I consider Torreon or Nak'nalji my home, and I was very, fortunate to, be able to grow up in a multicultural household and learn what I can from both my Navajo side and my Filipino side. However, I didn't grow up speaking Navajo fluently. So because of that, there was a lot of there's still a lot of traditional knowledge that I wasn't able to pick up growing up. But I think that still being in my home community and having that connection there, I was able to kind of, and even doing the research that I'm doing today, there's still some stuff that I was able to pick up and incorporate into my research. So I just wanted to give a little overview. So in traditional knowledge of what I understand, I know there's a lot of definitions to it and a lot of concepts that contribute to traditional knowledge, but some of the common concepts in traditional knowledge are that it is embedded in language and practice, and that it's also based on place and connection to the land and the spaces. And there are also, we have to recognize the interconnections and interdependence of, the world, different systems in the world. And also this knowledge is passed down from generation to generation. And so some of the things, I was kind of trained to do my research, or most of the research I'll be talking about today, at New Mexico Tech, where I was doing my PhD. And we're in the programs, the hydrology program at New Mexico Tech is really kind of based on traditional Western science and Western hydrology. And so when I was trying to do this research on the tribe, I knew I couldn't, take the same approaches that they trained me on, as I can, working with the tribe. So there were some, indigenous research approaches that I had to do while doing this research, and mostly that included giving back. I wanted to work with my tribe, and I wanted to do something and provide research and knowledge that was beneficial to the Navajo Nation. I also wanted to do something that was relevant, something that can be applied to the issues that are going on today. And also, I wanted to be respectful while doing this research. I didn't want to impose any sort of, questions that people didn't really care about, or impose my way onto the sites that I was at. And so this took a lot of relationship building, which started when I was a master's student. So this photo here shows just me helping to collect some samples with a team of New Mexico Tech researchers on the Animas River during one of their projects. And also this photo here shows also my grandmother's, my home in Torreon during one of my niece's Kinalda ceremonies that we just had. So to kind of put this research into perspective, I'll talk about give a little background on water resources and so some of my motivation for doing this research. As many of you know and have heard earlier today, there's about 30 to 40% of households on the Navajo Nations that do not have plumbing or infrastructure to bring running water. And according to the 2000 census, about half of the homes for my home community in Torreon, don't have running water, and I don't think that's changed much since then. And also, so because of this lack of running water, there's a lot of people have to haul this water, and or we already have this problem with lack of jobs, and poor economy, and a lot of our families already live below the poverty line, but we still have to pay this excess amount to haul water. So according to one of the recent Navajo Nation water resource development strategies, it costs about 40,000 acre feet to haul water for families on a reservation. And compared to in urban systems where there is the infrastructure for running water, it only costs $600 per acre foot. And so hopefully to alleviate the stress of just trying to find water and bring water into their homes, there was a recent water rights settlement for the tribe on the San Juan River. And I know Daryl had mentioned this settlement or this project earlier, but as part of this settlement is the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. So in this project, water will be diverted from the San Juan River that I outlined here in blue. So this is in the northwest part of New Mexico. This is, the San Juan River. And so there's a pipeline system being built, and part of this pipeline system, they'll divert water from the San Juan River and provide water to some of these homes on the northwest part of New Mexico and in these eastern Navajo communities. This includes the city of Gallup. Another part of this pipeline system is the Cutter Lateral project. And in this project, they will also divert water a little further upstream from the San Juan River. And this project, will consist of some infrastructure that will bring water to my home community of Torreon. So Torreon will be one of the last communities to receive running water from this project. So what does that have to do with mountainous water resources? Well, this here is a map of the San Juan River Basin. And as you can see, the San Juan River is fed by many mountainous streams or mountainous watersheds. And so, because mountains receive the highest amount of precipitation in the Southwest, they are really, important sources of water. And mountains can store water in the form of snowpack and also in groundwater. And so, these mountainous watersheds are important to understand because they feed into these larger river basins that are important sources of water for communities in the Southwest. So here's another, just a little basic background on stream flow, mountainous stream flow in the Southwest. So this is a hydrograph. So it shows this is the calendar day, so it goes from January to December, and this is the discharge or stream flow. So usually, before we really, in our mountainous watersheds, we depend a lot on snowpack, because when the snow accumulates, then it starts to melt, and we get this big pulse of snowmelt runoff during the spring. So this is what you see. This is the snowmelt runoff, and then we have a little bit of a dry season, and then eventually in some places, there's monsoon rains that can increase the amount of stream flow. So these are hydrographs for different mountainous watersheds in the Southwest, including the Whiskey Creek watershed here in red, which is located on the Navajo Nation, or in the Chusca Mountains. Let's see. So some of the projected impacts of climate change on these watersheds are, first, that because of hotter temperatures, there will be less precipitation, and more precipitation as rain rather than snow. And these hotter temperatures will also lead to earlier snowmelt runoff, a longer dry season, and more frequent and severe wildfires. So if we go back to this slide, oops, okay. So you see the snowmelt runoff pulse with the earlier, snowmelt, we would expect to see the snowmelt pulse occur earlier in the year. And it might not be as big as, in years before. And because of this earlier snowmelt pulse, the time between that snowmelt runoff pulse and the months, like monsoon season, it'll be longer. So that's the drier season that we're expected to have, that'll be longer. And so in other presentations where I presented this, in Navajo Nation, water summits, I've had community members, who live in the Chuscas come up to me and say, those are projected impacts, but that's what we're already seeing that's happening in the mountains today. So, it's not really, something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that they observe that's already happening. So, because of that, what can we do to, better prepare for these impacts of climate change? How will it impact stream flow? How can we prepare for this, or as tribal communities? So when I was as a master's student, because I wanted to do research with my tribe, I couldn't figure out really what topic I wanted to talk about. So I approached the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch, and they had some snow survey data where they study snowpack on the Chusca Mountains, and they asked me to kind of analyze the snowpack data and look for trends, and just to see how it would if there's any sort of trends, and also whether they could use any of this analysis to discontinue some of the snow survey sites, because there's a lot of costs and time involved in collecting data from these snow survey sites. And so if there were any redundant sites that they could collect data from, and they could reduce the amount of time and cost to collect this data. And so that was how I started working with the Navajo Nation. And I continued. It was great because I developed this relationship with the tribe, and I was able to continue working with them for my doctoral research. So here's a photo with some of the Navajo Water Management Branch technicians helping or collecting stream flow data on the Whiskey Creek watershed. So now I'll go a little bit more into my snowpack study.
Okay, I'll give it over to her.
Yad Shea Ronaldo Association, just wanted to first acknowledge the Native peoples that originally inhabited this area. I think it's the Washishu, the Nuwu, Nume, and the Paiute. There's the last one, but I wanted to acknowledge that as a part of paying tribute and respect to the indigenous peoples in this area. So for those of you, Lonnie gave a really good explanation of traditional knowledge, but for those of you that have never seen it or really understand what it is, it's actually an indigenous worldview that's linked to how we are connected to the world, and also how many of these, like Lonnie said, stated that many of these knowledge systems are shared intergenerationally. They're shared through songs, foundational teachings, and stories of creation, even through artwork. And it's our indigenous worldview on how we're connected to all of creation. And that oftentimes is based on giving versus taking. And it's very important. It has many definitions. The one thing that I want to say, it's a valid form of knowledge, specifically scientific knowledge. Indigenous research methodologies is, there's an organization called the American Indian Research Association. And within this organization, they developed, specifically Dr. Lori Lambert, who developed this web system, conceptual web, of how to go about doing research and conducting research within indigenous communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about it when I get to my slides. But the one thing that I wanted to highlight is that these are really place-based methods, like Lonnie was mentioned earlier, and that pays close attention to our worldviews, our cultural values, and really the most important part of it is takes the community's perspective on and all of that. And also, all of this knowledge is coming directly from tribal nations versus Westerners coming in and saying, dictating what they want to teach us. It's all oftentimes the other way around, and it's often gained through relationships. So how does this fit into being indigenous myself, being an environmental chemist by training? When I started grad school, I really wanted to be able to not suppress who I am and take all my cultural values along with me and bring it up and have attention brought to it. So in this concept is called two-eyed seeing, and it's a concept in which from one eye we have an indigenous knowledge system for me to know knowledge. Then from the other eye, we're seeing from the perspective of a Western scientist as how, but together we merge the two, I'm merging the two, and there's many of us that are doing this to do the indigenous science that we're conducting within our communities. Even maybe some of us are not conducting research within communities, but at their institutions on other subjects. But the one thing that I really wanted to highlight is how important indigenous knowledge is and is in the scientific, has a place in the scientific arena, because it brings forth indigenous community perspectives. It brings about expertise, like how Daryl mentioned earlier this morning about how we need to have our own expertise, our own tribal members going out there, learning and coming back and helping our own tribal nations. They provide expertise on policy, environmental and social justice issues. But the one thing that reason why this is important is because it brings about the tribe's self-determination, their capacity building, and their resilience in all of the research that's being conducted and taking ownership of that knowledge that's being shared. And why do we want to incorporate indigenous knowledge into science? It's because there are many intersections in which traditional knowledge and Western science come together. Oftentimes indigenous peoples are engaged in various forms of science. Anything from like wool dyeing to the mathematics and weaving, these are just native examples, or stories of the silver fox and berries and so forth. But the one thing that's really important for me is that we have our own systems, our own versions of meteorology, of physics, of chemistry, of earth science. All of this is important, even psychology. And it's really linked to our worldviews and how we see the world. And it's oftentimes a sense of place and relationship to the land, which is the reason why we know the things that we know. And we're deriving, as indigenous scientists, our own indigenous research methodologies to approach some of these community issues that we have. So from here, I wanted to give you some examples of indigenous knowledge. So right now, there are, for many generations, you've seen all the beautiful beadwork on different tribal regalia. A lot of these, they're not just designs, and some of them are maybe, but a lot of them share tribal knowledge. For an example, this Ojibwe beadwork from Jessica Goki. She has this beadwork where she has the 4 stages of vegetation: leaves, or seeds, buds, or leaves, buds, flowers, and fruit that are specific to the Ojibwe people. Which would be the same thing from a Western scientist perspective of this food diagram of edible plants in the wild. So it's how they teach their children about what's edible, what's sacred to that tribe. Another example is from the Hopi Nation. I had the privilege of getting to hear Vernon Maya Yesva. I totally butchered that. I'm so sorry, Vernon. But he's the director of Black Mesa Trust. And he told this beautiful story of the hydrologic cycle according to their own perspective about how that we're all born of liquid and water and conceived in water. And then as we go from there, we go from liquid to vapor through our breath. The vapor goes up to the celestial seas. We come back down, we return as rain and snow to recharge the aquifers, the lakes, and the springs. And it's just another viewpoint of a hydrologic cycle, and I'm pretty sure I've heard other stories of Dene, in the Dene, that we also have our own stories of the hydrologic cycle. It's just a different viewpoint, a different perspective, but all the same. Then comes to my research. So when I was conducting a literature review, went through a bunch of interviews, and I came across this story of our knowledge of uranium. So the Holy People, when we first came to the world that we're in, we were given an option between 2 yellow powders, one from the plants and one from the earth or the rocks. And when we were given this choice to use as part of our way of life, and that would be sacred to us, we were given a choice, and we chose the corn pollen, and which led us down to the road of our beliefs on it's a life philosophy. But we were also warned that if we had ever removed the yellow dust, powder from the rocks, it would bring great harm and great evil. And of course, through prospectors, for the longest time, we kept it a secret as long as we could. And finally, the prospectors kept coming and coming and coming, and they were able to locate the uranium, and they started prospecting and mining. And now we are forced to deal with the long-term impacts of the uranium mining as well as vanadium mining, and it has impacts on both the environment and human health. So another story, also from my home community. So many years I was at the University of Montana. I walked up and down past this map over here. Never paid any attention to it. And I wondered, one day I just stopped and I looked at it and I saw Arizona is all the way down here. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, there's a Phytosaurus that was there in our area. Then I remembered a story my grandfather used to tell, or still tells, of a crocodile that would seduce women. And he'd come from where his waters were, he'd come to the community, he seduced the women, and every time he stayed longer and longer and longer. And the women would often tell him that you need to go back, the climate is, the weather is changing, we're getting less rain, and so forth. He never listened. Till one day, he ventured out too far and too long and got stuck in the mud and became petrified in this area to become this mountain, or this mountain in the Sweetwater area. And I was like, crocodile, as a child, I was like, crocodile out here? You know, I was naive, didn't really pay much attention to it. But lo and behold, 20, 30 years later, my grandfather was right. It was a crocodile that lived in that area, which is the Fido source. And it's just an example of the importance of indigenous knowledge and how it's passed on through generations and through generations. To me, it was just a kid's story, just a child's story, fictional story. But it actually, within it, had a lot of important scientific information, which now I really, next time I see my grandfather, I have to say, tell him about that crocodile. And so this brings...
Wonderful to have these presenters here, because I started my PhD in 2001, and I, like Lanny, wanted to do work with my tribe, and I went to every single professor in my department, and they all said, oh no, a consulting firm can do that, you need to do cutting edge research. And then when I went to do my postdoc, again, similar situation. It wasn't until towards the end of my postdoc that I was able to start working with the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. So it was nearly probably 10 years post starting my PhD until when I started working with tribes. It's wonderful to see that they're already doing their research during their graduate work with tribes. And so today I try to support, students doing work with tribes. I have students in my lab that are working with tribes because we really, like Ronalda said, we really need our own indigenous scientists to be working with our people because they understand the culture and the priorities, and then really building the capacity of our tribes to address their own challenges. So again, thank you for coming, and I'll turn it over to Crystal Tully Cordova.
Thank you, Carletta. So today I'm going to be discussing Diné traditional knowledge and how it's been supported by hydroscience investigations in the Four Corners region. And She'e Crystal Tully Cordova yan She'e Twitch in the Shneka as a Nebashichin Hashkan Zoha Edeshet Hu Hikli Edeshanale. And it's important that I identify my identity because that ties myself to the research that I do. So I am of the Bitterwater clan, born for the Tangle people clan. My maternal grandfather's clan is the yucca fruit strung on a line. And my paternal grandfather's clan is the water that flows together. And it's important that I give tribute to these two women up here because it was from them that I first learned about water and about the importance of water to a Diné person. So the communities that I grew up in are Bistoklejendejkij and Twasakai. Twasakai is white water in English. And what you can see there in the pictures is the precipitation changes across this region. And so really talking to the point of indigenous knowledge of how place-based knowledge has impacted my journey in academia. So Virgil had discussed the vision statement of the 10 Tribes Partnership, and a part of that, water is life, and definitely true in Diné philosophy. Is how we say that. And it's not just a saying that people say, but more so a philosophy of life. Everything from the sapling in the mountains, to the sagebrush or grasses on the plateaus, to the medicinal plants that we gather for our ceremonies, to our subsistence living, hunting deer and elk, and then also with our sheep, and then to the dryland farming that we do. All of these things are taught to us from a very young age and from multiple family members, from grandparents, from our grandparents' siblings, from aunties and uncles, and other friends and family. And so when I was in the 4th grade, I think this was pretty much my introduction to the water cycle, a very Western science type of view. And for me, I couldn't relate to the oceans very much because the place that I grew up in northern Arizona, that's something you don't see often. And one of the things that I noticed were a few things that I could relate to. Definitely knowing that there was groundwater, surface water, and precipitation. And this is what the water cycle looked like to me growing up in the area in which I did. So on the upper left-hand corner, when I would be herding sheep during the summers, I could see these beautiful storms come in the summertime. And I always wondered, how does that come to be? How does precipitation come and fall in only certain areas, and why is it not falling here, especially on a hot day when you're herding sheep? But then oftentimes we go to the mountains to go collect our firewood for the winter, and it was there that I began to see springs and lakes and streams. And I always knew there were a lot of ephemeral streams throughout the Navajo Nation because the place I grew up had a lot of those. But also growing up, I grew up hauling water. I grew up without electricity and running water. And so with that, you begin to have a different understanding about water, a different appreciation about water, and the importance it is for your vitality and also for your livelihood, not only of yourself, but for your family and everything else in the natural world. So growing up, I've seen many clippings, news clippings such as this found in the Navajo Times. Navajo Nation, so this is from, the top one is from July 4th, 2013. Navajo Nation declares drought of emergency. And then when we go a few months later within the same year to October, over half of the Navajo Nation is flooded. In our communities, we have chapters and not necessarily towns or communities. And so more than half of the chapters were impacted by flooding. But then when we go to the next year, in February of 2014, drought continues to persist, and we begin to wonder about our water future and what needs to occur with that. And then in 2015, snow is pretty, but it doesn't redeem a lousy water year. So these are some clippings that really had an impact on me and the water research that I did. And why is examining changes in precipitation so important? And before conducting this research, I met with a lot of different tribal organizations within the Navajo Nation. I mean, everything from the NRCS to the forestry people, as well as fish and wildlife. I mean, everything under the sun. And what it came up to is that they were all concerned about their groundwater system, but not only that, recharge to perennial and ephemeral streams, and that's definitely something that comes with changes in precipitation, but also related are dust migrations on the Navajo Nation. So as drought persists and there's no vegetation to hold down those to hold down the sediment, then dust occurs, and then the flow within ephemeral and perennial streams is also something that is of concern. Plant and animal populations through the Navajo Nation has been occurring. In the past 10 years, the Navajo Nation Fish and Wildlife just put out a report, and from over the past 10 years, there's been a decline in mule deer populations. Over 2,000 mule deer have declined in this area. But also with that, I mean, there's been an increase in feral horse populations. And so how does that impact the land as well as changes in precipitation? Wildfires are also of concern, as well as vegetative cover and the alteration in species. So here's the approach that I took, and Ronalda gave a great description of how it interconnects with the scientific research method, but not only that, with indigenous knowledge research method, but also with Diné philosophy of educational research method. And in thinking about it, I knew before I did research with my tribe that I wanted to be able to do it in a manner that would make my grandparents proud of me, not in a manner that would bring shame to our family. And so I knew that we needed to start in a way that had a foundation towards a vision. Anytime you start something, you need to have a vision of where you want to go, and so that's the Nsahakis, the planning stage. And then go into Nahata, the development of goals for a future purpose, and then embracing life's values through continuous learning. That was something that has always been taught from a very young age, and then the reflection of accomplished goals and objectives. And within Diné philosophy and Diné thinking, it's not about oneself and bringing oneself up. Sometimes in academia and Western science, that tends to be the case. Many people want to have as many publications or get cited as many times as they want, when in reality, coming as an Indigenous person and an Indigenous person in academia specifically, it's more about sharing your knowledge that you have learned, but also giving credit to where credit is due. So these are the entities that I mentioned that I interviewed and sat down with, had one-on-one conversation. But one thing that I should also note is that as a researcher, I couldn't take the communication methodologies that my fellow researchers were doing. Email and phone calls, those are something that tribal partners, they don't necessarily do, especially if they don't know you. So many times I had to do unannounced visits and just say Yate and introduce myself, who I am, where I am from, and then find these commonalities. And it was there that you build a trusting relationship and to be able to be working with these tribal partners. And so with that, I had the opportunity to be able to meet the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch. And before meeting them, I had just Googled, Google Scholared, Navajo water, Navajo precipitation changes, and not a lot comes up. But when I met with the Navajo Nation Water Management Branch, what I was so amazed to be able to find out was that the Navajo Nation has been recording their precipitation changes in the region since the 1950s and 60s. And from the 2000s to present, they have a large network. And this was their large network for water year 2015. It includes tipping bucket, it includes snow course sites. There's 2 snow tell sites on there as well. We have stream gauging sites, precipitation sites. One thing that should also be noted that Carl kind of alluded to is that this is a large area. When you think about it in size, it's similar in size to West Virginia. To get from one side of the res to the other takes hours. And it's a long road trip. And this network is largely supported by people from the Water Monitoring and Inventory Group that go up there month to month to evaluate the volume differences from each month for precipitation, for example. And the reason why there's no, maybe one might say, well, you could probably save a lot of money if you had it set up to satellite or cell phones and do that type of recording. But the thing is, there are many homes in these areas that don't even have electricity. To be able to have that capability, the Navajo Nation Water Management is doing the best they can with the team members that they can. So here are what the vegetation changes look like throughout the Navajo Nation. And with vegetation changes, you know that there are definitely changes in precipitation. So for example, with ponderosa pine tree areas, you know that they see a lot more precipitation than, let's say, for the Denahotso or the Cameron-Botaway Gap areas. And it's important to note that because then what you do note from being able to see these differences and changes in precipitation is that being able to only have a few precipitation collectors throughout the Navajo Nation is not necessarily the best representation for precipitation in this region. Even from the communities that Lonnie, Ronalda, and Carletta are from, the precipitation in our areas and in our communities are a lot different just between the 4 of us. So what I was able to do was be able to use K-mean clustering in R to be able to develop a hydroclimatic regions for the Navajo Nation based on precipitation data from 90 precipitation sites from 2002 to 2015 water year, not to impose geographical boundaries on these areas, but more so using K-means clustering to be able to evaluate the precipitation changes and develop high mountain areas. Let's say, for example, group 4 in dark green, which is representative of the Cheska Mountain and the Navajo Mountain regions. It gets a lot more precipitation that may be different than the western side of the Navajo Nation in yellow. So just remember the colors. Black is north, east is white, yellow is west, and then blue is south. So here's what the precipitation climatology looks like. And one might ask, why even do this in the first place with people knowing this? So yes, our people have known that we've seen a bimodal precipitation regime throughout the years. You can ask any grandmother, when do we get rain, or when's the rain going to come? And they know it's going to come in the summer, and they know it's going to come in the winter. But this quantifies the amount of precipitation that has been done. So the Navajo Nation Water Management, in their drought contingency plans as well as their water development plans, has alluded to these two precipitation regimes in the area, but what hadn't been quantified was the amount. So for example, as stated in Lonnie's research, she said that the mountains get the highest amount of precipitation. When we look at this graph here in green and we look at the winter months, we see that's definitely the case, and that the Navajo Nation, it sees the largest amount of peak precipitation for its total annual precipitation during the winter, whereas the rest of the Navajo Nation receives its precipitation predominantly in the summertime with the North American monsoon. But something a little different, if you pay attention to the gray line for July, that's the area that Lonnie's from on the eastern side of the Navajo Nation, they see peak precipitation a month earlier than the rest of the Navajo Nation when related to summer precipitation. As far as looking at winter precipitation, we see that across the Navajo Nation, there are 2 peaks or 1 peak, depending on the region that you're from, and when the peak precipitation in the winter occurs, and that's always an important feature to pay attention to.